Buckle up, ladies. It's about to get a little bit uncomfy today.
Guys, I think this might be my hottest take to date. Don't shoot the messenger.
Oh, y'all are not gonna like this one. The patriarchy is not gonna like what I have to say today. I can tell y'all that much. You're listening to Hot Takes by Anna. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Hot Takes by Anna. Today is going to be a very interesting episode. I'm not going to lie to you guys. This is another one of my favorite micro topics within feminism to discuss, although people don't tend to like this conversation very much. Big disclaimer, this topic can be an uncomfortable one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and throw that out there. If you are a woman who is a mother, strongly desires to be a mother at some point in time, or maybe even if you don't desire those things, you still might find some of what I'm about to say a little bit challenging, maybe a little bit hard to swallow. That being said, I want to make it abundantly clear that the critiques I'm going to be discussing in this episode are towards the systems, towards the structures, towards the institutions that force motherhood down women's throats, right? The critique is not towards women who are mothers, okay? This is something that I see oftentimes in online circles when feminist content creators raise similar points or are making content about a similar ideology as what I'm about to discuss. You'll get a lot of pushback of, being a mom is the hardest job in the world. You're disrespecting mothers by saying this. And I want to make it clear that that could not be further from what I am trying to convey. I think that will become a little bit more obvious as I start diving into this topic. But I am very well aware that being a mother is the hardest job in the world. And guess what? The patriarchy is aware of that as well. So let's get into it. All right. So today we're going to be talking about how this idea of motherhood is totally just weaponized by the patriarchy, right? It's weaponized by men who want to keep women in their place. And despite the fact that motherhood is this beautiful, amazing, miraculous thing, it has unfortunately become, not that, under the systems of patriarchy that we find ourselves living in these days, right? I don't know if any of you have noticed lately, but even the men are starting to jump onto this train and starting to really buy into this narrative of, oh, women are powerful, life-giving goddesses, which again, yes, we are. But as I discussed in the last episode, when men are jumping on the bandwagon with a certain idea, it's kind of like, And to me, it's very, very clear that men are very excited to push this idea and push this rebranding of the spiritual, divine, feminine, of life-giving women being mothers, because that is exactly what they want women to believe. So let's talk a little bit about why I am saying that I believe motherhood is being weaponized against women. While motherhood is amazing and while it is very inherent, I believe, to any species, we want to reproduce, right? It's ingrained in us to further the species. So I think oftentimes people misunderstand me when I talk about this topic in the sense that they're thinking that I want our entire population to die out. Now, while I think we're at a point where that might not be the worst thing in the world, that's also not what I'm necessarily promoting. What I want to promote is a more critical lens towards motherhood, right? I want to promote awareness of this idea that motherhood does not necessarily have to be the be-all, end-all for every woman, and it doesn't have to be a thing at all for women that don't want to be mothers. It has made me very happy to see lately that there has been more of a push towards more intentional parenting, right? I do think that that was something that I was starting to see with my generation of millennials and even, younger Gen Zs of just talking more openly about the fact that, hey, maybe we should put a little bit more thought into whether we want to have children or not, right? Babies are expensive. It's very, very taxing on the mother's body. I think that's another conversation I've seen spark up in the past few years. And it makes me so happy to see women being open and honest about, hey, childbirth is it's no walk in the park, right? Childbirth actually sucks. Here are all the physical things that happen to your body or can happen to your body as a woman when you have a baby, right? And I think that especially, whatever you want to call them, the right, the more conservative camp of people or anyone who really wants to uphold patriarchy at all costs, these conversations are making them very uncomfortable, right? And so I think that in response to this, that also ties into why we're seeing this, this big backlash and this new wave of the trad wife propaganda and the divine feminine, know your role as a woman type of thing, is because these ideas that, hey, maybe motherhood doesn't have to be a given for every woman, and maybe it doesn't have to be a thing at all for every woman. I think that is a very clear threat to the patriarchy. So let's get into why exactly I think the patriarchy loves the idea of motherhood, right? Let's really think about this. So when a woman gets pregnant, right, it's already a given that she is going to be carrying that child theoretically for 9+ months. Okay, so she's already down for the count for 9 months. She's having one baby. So 9 months per pregnancy, going to be down for the count, going to be, nesting, having to do everything and shift her entire focus towards the baby. And then when that baby is born, as we know, no matter how involved the father may be in the whole equation, the woman is going to end up doing, at least for the initial few weeks and months, the primary caregiving, right? If you're nursing, there's also the biological attachments and hormones and the, attachments that the baby will have towards the mother. The mother is going to end up doing most of the work, period, right? In any normal situation. And then let's say that this woman was working before she got pregnant. It's probably going to be quite a while before she's ready to get back to work, right? I know that's not always an option, especially in this country. Our maternity leave laws leave much to be desired. However, physically, whether the maternity leave is there or not, the woman is going to be physically down for the count and probably mentally as well, right? Postpartum depression, very much a thing. It's going to forcefully remove the woman from the workforce for a period of time, right? And that's only for one baby. So you've got women having multiple babies, and this is unfortunately why it is very common for women, even if they have had a very thriving career prior. Oftentimes you will see them just permanently leave the workforce after a certain point in time, depending on how many children they have, and of course, if their partner is able to sustain that financially. And this is only talking about the direct consequences of pregnancy and childbirth themselves, right? This isn't even getting into the way that motherhood tends to consume a woman's identity. And it should, right? It should. I think that raising humans is a very hard job, especially in this day and age. And so, yes, it should be a job you take very, very seriously. But as we've seen time and time again, under the system of patriarchy, the woman is going to end up taking on most of that emotional and physical, and really in every sense of the word, the labor of raising that child, not only as a baby, but as they become a human. It's just by design, this nuclear family model where we've got husband, he's a man, wife who is a woman, and the dad and the mom. It's just by design easier for a woman to get tied down and more, I guess, involved in the whole process of parenting itself. And when a mother's time is completely consumed by raising her children, making sure they're okay, making sure all of their basic needs are met, they're not going to have a lot of time and energy to put into other things, i.e., noticing the inequity in the system that they're currently operating in, i.e., speaking out and trying to make change and dismantle these current systems, right? It's all by design, right? It's something that I think sounds a little bit jarring and conspiratorial, upon first hearing it, but when you really dig into it, it is very clear to see why the patriarchy loves motherhood, why the patriarchy wants women to be having babies and to be putting all of their time and effort and attention into that. It totally makes sense, right? It completely serves this current structure when women are using all of their time and energy on other things, on whatever it may be, right? They want women to stay preoccupied with anything besides noticing what's really happening to them, noticing the injustice in the world and how the world really treats women. And I think motherhood is a really, really, really easy one, right? So in that sense, it is very much in men's best interest for women to be preoccupied with quite literally anything else besides, looking around and noticing the injustices that are afflicting them every single day. And I think that motherhood is really a slam dunk, right? That is a very important role. It's a very taxing role, and it is, to a degree, very a natural role, right? It is biologically a very natural role that a woman has. Now, as you know, I don't believe that natural equates to you must do it, right? But I do think that there's a reason why most women do end up becoming mothers. That being said, I think that it's something that we need to continue to examine with a more critical lens, right? And so when I say that, I don't mean to say, hey, women, stop having babies. Everyone now, stop doing it. I know that there are women who really do, despite whatever progressive ideas they may hold, being a feminist, wanting the liberation of women, that still want to be a mother. And I don't think that those things necessarily have to be mutually exclusive, right? That's not what I'm saying at all. I think that there's a lot to be said for women who are intentionally raising the next generation of children who is not going to be promoting these traditional, conservative, restrictive, patriarchal ideologies, right? I think that the women who are committed to doing the work of unindoctrinating their children and creating a generation that has, a much more open worldview, I think that work is very, very important. So again, I'm not out here saying, hey, let's all just stop having babies entirely. If you feel that calling to be a mother, I think you should lean into it, right? I know I just talked about choice feminism, and it probably made it sound like I think that no woman should fulfill those roles. But again, that's not what I'm saying at all. I think it's a very, very important role. While I personally cannot relate to the desire of wanting to be a mom, I hear a lot of women talk about it's just in my bones, it's biological, I just really want to be a mom. I've never had that, right? I definitely see myself being a mother in some capacity one day, but for whatever reason, I've always envisioned it being a much more non-conventional genre of motherhood, if you will, right? I mean, I think that maybe I'll end up with some stepkids. I'd love to foster. I'd love to eventually adopt. I would love, or I shouldn't say love, but I could see a child somehow just randomly coming into my life when they're like a teenager, and I'm able to step in and take over that role of being a mother. So I guess I do relate to these feelings of wanting to mother and teach and kind of have a role in the growth and development of a child, but never once have I had this biological, I must give birth. In fact, I've always been very terrified of childbirth. I think that once women started getting honest about it on the internet, which again, I am so grateful to all these women for, and I'm grateful to the internet for, that just further solidified my thoughts that I've always had about I'm not sure I want to do that. And I've talked to a few women who kind of relate and share those feelings with me. But like I said, I think for the most part, most women I know, they do want to have a baby. They do want to experience pregnancy. They do want to experience, having a biological child. And I think that that's very valid, right? I think that that's, if it's a desire that's within you, I can imagine that it's probably not super easy to stamp it out. But again, I think that we can have this discussion about motherhood, and say that two things can be true at once, right? Y'all know that's my favorite phrase. Two things can be true at once. Yes, being a mother is a very important role, and many women want to fulfill it and should fulfill it, but also saying, hey, but let's maybe think about how we're looking at motherhood and how we can kind of challenge the ideas around it that we have been indoctrinated with our whole lives. And I think that challenging our ideas around motherhood can start with challenging this simple concept of, oh, as a woman, you eventually get married to a man, and then eventually at some time after that, you have babies with him, and that's just what you do. This whole idea of that's just what you do, I think we really need to start there. Again, I'm really happy to see that conversations like this had been sparking up online and in my social circles in the past few years of both men and women kind of taking a step back and saying, hey, I think we eventually want to do this, but look at the world we're living in right now. Children are expensive. The internet is making it harder to control, like, what kind of information they're consuming. All very valid critiques that, of course, the patriarchy and the American conservative right is trying to completely negate. And there is very much a reason that they are trying so hard to negate these ideas, because I do believe that upon even just taking that initial first step of being more intentional about having children, you will find that many women might end up deciding that, hey, actually, I don't want to do this, regardless of how strong their inherent biological desire to give birth is. And I know many friends like that, right? That are like, hey, I do have that desire within me. However, I'm unfortunately having to make the educated decision of holding off indefinitely or maybe forever, given the world that we're in, until we can live in a world that makes it easier for women to have children and raise children without losing their entire identity. But again, that is not the world that the patriarchy and the powers that be want. They do not want that. They do not want to make it easier for women to have children while also maintaining some sort of sense of self. Because again, what happens when women have enough time to look at the world around them? What happens when women have all this extra time and energy to critique the world around them and to get involved in changing the system and dismantling all of these ideologies that we've been subjected to? It would, in theory, ultimately lead to the inevitable collapse of the patriarchy. And so I think it makes perfect sense that this is such a big hot button issue right now, especially for our current administration. All of these policies that are being enacted that do not on the surface say, hey, this is we are forcing women to be mothers law, but you look at things like the SAVE Act and things like the big beautiful bill and the careers that are being no longer funded or no longer considered professional careers. It all ties back to this idea of promoting motherhood. Okay. And I think that's really important to keep in mind as well. So this is where I kind of want to pivot and talk about one of my favorite niche movements that's going on right now. If you somehow have never heard of the 4B movement in South Korea, I'm going to explain to you what that is, because I think this ties in perfectly with this idea of the weaponization of motherhood and what women can do to push back. So, 4B movement started a few years ago in South Korea. Women were just collectively not happy with the way that the government was treating women, the way that men were being allowed to treat women, and they just decided enough is enough. And so they adopted this mentality, and I mean, clearly it was enough South Korean women to make an impact, because it actually ended up, spoiler alert, it ended up resulting in actual policy changes, and actual cultural shifts that are still ongoing. But enough women to make an impact decided that, hey, we are no longer going to have sex with men. We are no longer going to date men. We are no longer going to have babies. And we are no longer going to get married until our material conditions improve in our country. And lo and behold, like I said, it ended up resulting in actual policy changes. This is where I think that, I talk a lot about this idea of women not understanding their inherent value. And if we truly did, things would look very different in this world. I think that a lot of women would maybe hear like, wow, like women just saying no to men has resulted in this much change. Yes, it has. And it makes perfect sense, right? We have been told all of our lives that men are the prize, and obtaining the desire of a man should be every woman's ultimate goal in life so that she can then proceed to go on, get married to him, have his babies, yada, yada. But that's just not the reality. And I know I've touched on this a bit in previous episodes that women really, truly are the prize here. And we need to realize that. And I say that very, very seriously and not in this, kind of like, ooh, yes, we're the prize. I mean that. I genuinely mean that. And I want women to start realizing that access to us as women is something that is very important to men. They don't want us to know that, right? The patriarchy does not want women to realize how much men truly need us and our labor and just our presence in order for society to continue as it has for so long. However, the reality is that women are very, very valuable. We are way more valuable than we've been told our entire lives. And I think the success of the 4B movement in South Korea is a perfect example of that. Just by saying, hey, men, you're not getting access to us until you collectively get your shit together, that clearly is scary enough for men, right? That clearly is threatening enough to the systems in place and the structures and the powers that be. And so I think this is a great example of an effective response to this weaponization of motherhood. And personally, I believe that women all over the world should be adopting this mentality. I'm a very, very vocal proponent of it. I know a lot of women don't consider it to be very realistic, but I believe that it is, I do not believe this idea is as far-fetched as it may seem on the surface, right? And I think it's very important for women, especially younger women, right, that maybe are not married yet and do not have children yet, even if they do eventually want that, to start just thinking more critically about the implications of it. And to take on this mentality of, hey, if a man is not meeting the material conditions I need in order to marry him or have babies for him, then I'm just not going to do it. I think it's something that would make a very, very big difference if every woman at an individual and personal level were to adopt that mentality. And so that would be my challenge to all of you today as women, especially, like I said, if you are not yet in a relationship with a man, if you do not yet have children, to maybe think about what your material conditions would be in order for you to want to engage in that life. So before closing out this episode, I do also want to make one more disclaimer. I know I made many at the beginning, but one more disclaimer, which is that if you are already a mother and maybe you have been thinking about this a lot lately, how maybe you were, you were sold a dream and you're waking up now to the material realities of what motherhood looks like, especially in this country, right? Not all hope is lost, right? I don't want the message to be, hey, you shouldn't have done that. You should regret this. Don't love your children. No, I think that if you are a mother who considers yourself aware of what's going on in the world and you do want to see change and you do want to contribute to dismantling the patriarchy, well, luckily you have an awesome opportunity having the children you have to raise them to be people who will not be perpetuating these oppressive ideologies, right? I know I referenced this a little bit in the beginning, and I think that with women collectively, the women who are mothers and want to see change in this world and the women who are not, I think that this is just the most perfect opportunity for us to come together, attack this from both angles, and just say that, hey, we're not standing for this anymore. This is not the world that we want the future generations to be raised in, especially women. And we're not going to let it happen. And I think that there are a lot of ways to do that. So I will end on that note for today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, please share this episode if you think anyone in your life would love it or would hate it. I need all the engagement I can get at this point. So thank you all, and I will catch you in the next episode.